our next segment highlights the topic, the crowd sings back. The best ideas shaping culture are shaped by culture. In conversation with our next speaker is Mr. Neeraj Roy, an Indian businessman and the managing director and CEO of Hungama Digital Media Entertainment. Under his leadership, Hungama today is South Asia's largest digital and mobile entertainment company. He was recently voted amongst the 50 most influential people in the mobile entertainment globally. So ladies and gentlemen, with a huge round of applause, please welcome Mr. Roy. Cool, casual, there is no barcode here.
Would be IAA soldier.
Let's do that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, joining Mr. Roy is our next speaker. What can I say? His name reminds me of Bridget Jones' Diary. And every girl in the room, every single girl in the room would be like, Mr. Darcy. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, it is Mark Darcy who leads Facebook's global business marketing team and also serves a dual role as Chief Creative Officer. Mark joined Facebook in the year 2011 and founded the Creative Shop, a team that works in partnership with nearly all major advertising holding groups and collaborates with independent creators, influencers, artists, production companies, media companies, and technologies. Last year alone, they helped produce thousands of projects across Facebook, Instagram, Messenger, and Oculus, working with 80% of the world's top 100 advertisers. In the year 2012, he founded the Facebook Global Creative Council, an advisory group on some of the most influential voices in the creative advertising space. So ladies and gentlemen, with a huge round of applause, please welcome the much anticipated Mr. Darcy. Welcome.
Welcome back. Thank you, Kubra. A very, very good afternoon, friends. I know you've all had your lunch, but once again, a big round of applause for our guest from here, from New York.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So over the next 30 minutes, Mark, this has been a topic and subject which we at the IAA have in our own way championed the last 3 or 4 years. The whole theme around content and branded content and content marketing, etc. So we're looking forward to an exciting conversation. Why don't you start with first just giving the audience a sense of your role at Facebook, and also particularly the fact that when we were talking backstage, you've been from the agency, you've been in media, etc. So, give them a little sense of that.
I would be happy to, and I just want to say how lovely it is to be here. Whoever decided to have this as a location to bring us all together, well done. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, the credit there goes to
really wonderful.
Sundar Swami, Pradeep Guha, Ramesh Narayan.
So thank you for them. Thank you for having me. As far as like my background, I started off in New Zealand as a creative, as a copywriter, creative director. I spent 10, 15 years in New York doing that. And then I worked in media. I worked for Time Warner as Chief Creative Officer there of a group there for about 7 years. And then in 2011, as the excellent introduction said, I came to Facebook to establish a creative function. And that sounds good, but if you remember, if those of you who remember Facebook in 2011, we had little ads on the side of a website.
Yes.
So being creative was a whole thing unto itself. But luckily, over the 8 years I've been there, the canvas and paint of creativity across our platforms on mobile have really accelerated. And as you heard, the group, the Creative Shop, and the work we've been doing with agencies and clients all around the world has really pushed forward mobile creativity and creativity for our clients. And that's been fantastic. And then about 6 or 7 months ago, I took on running our business marketing. So we have 2 main groups. Antonio Lucio runs our consumer marketing, and we have a business group that I now have the privilege of running around the world in about 60 markets. And that's really dedicated and focused to all of you and all the businesses and agencies around the world and how we create tools and platforms, events, training to enable people to unlock the potential of these services to grow their business. And that's what I do now.
And I'm sure you're delighted to be here in India, which I believe now is the second largest audience for you anywhere in the world, or is soon to become the largest audience in terms of just the sheer size of consumers. And obviously in India, we've had a fascinating last 2 years of a digital explosion. Several speakers before have talked about how in just 2 years there has been a 10x growth in data consumption, driven predominantly with deeper penetration of smartphones and the lowest cost data anywhere in the world. I mean, 2 years back, we used to be $3.50 for a gig of data. Now for 70 US cents, you can get 30 gigs of data. So I was reading just yesterday, Mark, eMarketer put out a story saying that in the US this year, 2019, digital advertising will eclipse traditional, which is print television, and perhaps get closer to about 54% of the market. For the first time in a major market, it's kind of getting there. And for us at IAA, we have celebrated expression in, and commercial expression of doing this. And when I was talking to you backstage, you mentioned there has never been a better time to incubate, support ideas which are driven by brands. Yeah. Why do you feel so?
Well, first of all, I'll just say about the shift. I think media, if we're doing media right, media should just shift where people are and how people are consuming content, right? So I've always believed very much that newspapers, different services, out-of-home radio, whatever it may be, all have a valuable place to play depending on what you're looking to do. And we just have to have our ideas be built where people are and be created where they are. And that's really, I think, why you're seeing that shift. But in terms of ideas, I think it comes back to my background. I grew up in New Zealand and in sort of the late 80s, even coming into the business. And I think sometimes there's so much change around us, we lose sight of the simple fact that we live in an extraordinary time where the distance between the ideas we have in our head and the marketplace have never been shorter. So people everywhere who are connected aren't just connected to consume content and connect with their friends and family, they're also connected to have the ideas that they want to put into the world, find the people who may care about them unbelievably quickly. And this is a distribution of power and potential that's really been unprecedented, and I think it's an incredibly exciting thing. Whether you're inside a large company in India and you've got an idea that you want to experiment with to learn how to reinvent your vertical or your company or your category, it's not just a small business thing. But if you are an entrepreneur, if you are somebody with an idea, the costs of establishing the potential of that idea in the world are, in many cases, nothing. And that's an extraordinary thing in two ways. One, I think it's a great, there was a Paul Pullman was talking this morning about, the equality in the world. I think this is an extraordinary expression of equality, that people anywhere can have access to turn that good idea into their head and an opportunity to make their life better and connect. I think it's very powerful.
No, so absolutely right. But on the same subject, this is an audience which comprises of media, marketeers, agencies. And traditionally, we've been accustomed to 1, 2, 3 forms of creative. Yeah. And they will get an expression either on radio, either on print, outdoor, television. And one of the conversations that's been talked about in this whole theme around content marketing is always on content marketing. From your experience, could you share with the audience some examples of mainstream brands of how they are going about doing this, including the creation of, so if 10 years back there was a need of a chief digital officer, there is now increasingly the role of a chief content officer in a company. And how do they navigate this? How do they get into a conversation which is almost daily without intimidating, their prospects, their customers in a certain form?
Yeah, well, I think the starting point, and obviously this is a conversation we've had for many years in many places, this idea of being always on. And I think it's not a phrase that I use. If I had a phrase, it would be always be interesting or always be relevant. And I actually think more than anything, our first belief is putting people first in the things that we do. And the reason all brands, I think, need to do that is just because we can create all this content, all these different stories, isn't the right place to start. The right place to start is our customer. our audience, whom we're trying to connect with, and what do we going to make that's going to be relevant and rewarding for them, and meeting them where they are. If we start with that lens, a lot of the questions you ask are answered by our primacy of our customer, which we say, well, they're here, and this is where they are on the journey. This is what I need to create to connect with them, to grow my business, to drive the, whether it's attention or action that we're looking to stimulate. I think the thing that you end up with is you do end up, for every brand in this room and every brand around the world, with more of a portfolio of a curated experience for your ideas, where you have an idea, you have a brand story, you have a film, you have whatever it may be, a marketing idea, and you need to express it in two ways. One piece is not going to be right for every single opportunity to connect with that audience, so you need to make sure you're building it in the right way. And you need to do the other thing. What we were talking about earlier, it needs to reflect culture. It needs to be responsive and iterative. We can't just make something, release it to the world, and fold our arms. We need to listen to how it's working and constantly improve it. So I think that's a really different attitude to creativity from where I grew up, which is like you make an ad, you release the ad, you go home. It's far more of a constant dialogue and conversation with the idea and how it's working.
Interesting example that comes to my mind was, I think, a year and a half back, like what Oreo did as an example
with the Oreo
of, my question really was about...
I'll give you another example, though. So last year, I had the great privilege of judging the Cannes Lion Festival and the social and influencer. And this very topic that you talk about was around, some of the very best work in the world. And one of the pieces of work that was very good, if you may have seen it, if you followed that world, was the work that an agency, Droga 5, did in Australia, for the Australian Tourism Corporation. And the thing that was fascinating about that piece, talking of television, is there was a Super Bowl commercial as one of the centerpieces. If you haven't seen the campaign, it was excellent. They pretended there was a new Crocodile Dundee film coming out, a big Hollywood blockbuster. And it was very, very popular. What's interesting when you look at the portfolio of content they curated, that was the central idea. There was a central film, but they built perfect executions around multitudes of different areas to bring that idea to life. So yes, you end up with a portfolio of content, but it's around a singular idea and it's beautifully crafted. So the craft you're looking for is still there. The other example that won a lot, which I think is a great case study to look at how this works as far as with culture, was Nike's campaign of Nothing Beats a Londoner, where they worked with the community to build the story, and they built it on stories, they built it where that community lived. So again, this idea of meeting our audience at eye level and creating for where they are and how they are.
Interesting. And if the audience here were to look for examples, etc., does Facebook support, showcasing quality case studies, etc., and where could they find those?
Well, those case studies are pretty widely available, but on Facebook, we have a Facebook for Business website where we put a lot of those.
Facebook for Business.
And we have a lot of case studies, not just of creative award-winning work, but amazing stories. And we have amazing stories from companies right here in India. I was just in Mumbai for a few days meeting with some of the companies that are building. And have you heard of Desi Hangover? Mm-hmm. So we met with the founder there. And when I think of a company, I was talking earlier of ideas into action. To have the idea, and we were talking earlier about purpose, to have an idea that the craft of making Indian shoes is as noble and valuable as a Milanese shoemaker, and to create a business where that economic power can be distributed, and you've now got 50,000 customers and you're building it on Instagram, you're building it across that. I think that's an extraordinary empowerment of a business case study of somebody taking that idea and building it into the world. And there are numerous ones, all around the world of people who are doing this every single day. So one of the things I love about my job, and it's a great job, is I get to work with the biggest marketers in the world, and they're the ones that are reinventing, and then you meet people like that are taking ideas and taking them to the world.
You talked about purpose and purpose of business, etc. So the theme of our conference here, the Congress here, is brand dharma, and which is really, your purpose, your objective, the action of sorts. So what would be, Facebook's message as brand dharma to a market, to its core constituency, to its, consumers?
Well, if you've ever spoken to anyone from Facebook, the first thing we have is this fundamental responsibility to the 2 billion people who use our services every single day with their information. And so the thing that defines the company is that and protecting that. And then secondarily, I think it's creating those spaces to make the ability for all of us, all around the world, to connect in a space that's respectful and conforms to community standards. And that goes across the gamut, from election integrity, which I know is a huge issue in India right now, to content moderation, to all the different aspects of control and transparency across advertising. And I think in that area, if you've been following the company, the investments we've been making, continue to make, and will continue to make, when you think of responsibility and you think of the issues you raise, I think all companies have them, but for us that would be the primary one. I think secondarily, I touch on my earlier points that I think we have a responsibility to businesses and to people with ideas to make the potential of the power of these platforms open and available to as many people as possible. And as I've taken on my new role, it's been one of the things that's really fired me up about the opportunity, which is this idea that any level of complexity, any level of any barrier that stops somebody being intimidated, either because of language or because of technical expertise or anything else that stops them taking their idea to the world, I think we have a responsibility, if we want to promote equality around the world, is to make it easier for anybody anywhere to access them. Sure. And we do that through community boost events. We want to get out into the community. We want to make our tools and training more available so that more people and more places can access them.
That you certainly do. In fact, again, in conversation earlier, I happened to talk to a couple of your colleagues from India, and they talked about 6 million small enterprises who have now started embracing with the intention of, accessing audiences, putting forward their products in their own form, and that has its own little...
A lot of that through social commerce.
Out of India alone.
Another company I met, I was lucky enough, it was Mishu, and the work they do to empower people across the space to become business owners and to use their curatorial skills to drive social commerce. And so this is a lot of very exciting area and something I think is very important. So I think that responsibility is also part of it.
So yesterday, we had, Mark, Martin Sorrell, and he spoke, of course, extensively about, his business, etc. But one of the things he talked about was a theme called Take Back Control, which is stemming from brands, that there is a desire from a middleware perspective to get deeper insights and move that and take that forward. And at the same time, we've got this broader privacy conversation that's happening, etc. How do you respond to the fact that ultimately it's a collaborative process? There's a platform, there are creative firms, there are marketeers, and there is the consumer out there. And my question to him was that you were complaining about 5 platforms dominating. What happens when 1,000 brands technically have this sort of take back control, and what happens in that scenario? So I know at this point in time there is a certain kind of, a friction of sorts, but what would be your message to the creative community to collaborating on content, essentially delivering the best experience to the consumer, putting the customer at the center, and yet taking, the best advantage of both the audience as also the products that are being put out there?
Well, I think there's two separate parts to your question. I think to the first part, if there's any movement we need to make, whether we're as a company or as an industry, around control, it's control to people. So the shift needs to be not control of our data as all of us as people to a company. It needs to be control that we have more control.
Which you have initiated. And if anybody wants to check, they can...
We need more transparency and more control and more education so people understand that the data belongs to them. This is how it's protected and how it is used, and give people more control and easy choices of those control so they choose. So if there's any control, I didn't see Saman's talk, but if there's any talk of control, I would be advocating very strongly on the part of people and them to determine what this is going to be. In terms of creativity, I think, yes, I think there's a huge symmetry of value that needs to be established, that if we are going to create things that are directed to you, there's an overwhelming value that you get a benefit out of it. I think that's been true for a long time.
So let's switch to the content and the creative side of this conversation. As you're probably aware, India has a very rich heritage. We produce almost 1,500 films a year in 17, 18 languages. Our film industry is about 100 plus years old. Our advertising world, driven 30 years back with the advent of broadcasters, we now have 900 TV channels out there. And traditionally, that has been the centerpiece. Now, in today's world of shorter stories, engaging conversations, how are Facebook's platforms, including Insta, etc., being leveraged by brands in telling this story to their audiences?
Yeah, well, I sort of have touched on some of this. I think the big shift, and we've been talking about this for a very long time in advertising and what we do. We're about a 100-year-old business globally, and it's been a reasonably simple business for most of that time, that there's something we watch, and it's very disruptible. And we've been very good at doing that. And that works very well when you have finite choice and limited control. As I grew up in New Zealand with 2 TV channels and no remote control, we couldn't afford remote controls, right? It was very simple business. However, when you have infinite choice and total control and zero cost of movement before those controls, you simply have to build your ideas where people are and how they consume. And one of the biggest things I think that gets missed in how companies like Facebook build is we build how people are consuming. They drive the change. People drive the change. Therefore, as creatives, as marketers, as content makers, we have to build to them. They are in charge of this. So if they say they have 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 3 minutes, we need to shape our ideas to that. We don't get to debate that. They've told us through their behavior.
There was an example that you were sharing about, a youngster watching ice hockey.
Yeah.
And the narration to that. I think tell the audience about that, because that's an interesting perspective to where consumption is heading.
Yeah, it was just those moments we all have in our lives when you meet someone and they tell you a story. And there was a friend of mine in New Zealand whose son plays ice hockey. And I said, oh, you must enjoy watching the games. And obviously there's a lot of great sport on TV. And to this young man, he was actually interested in 3 dimensions. One was playing hockey, one was watching obviously very compressed clips of the best parts of it, and the other was playing video games. Those were, and then it was actually watching it. And I think the way in which that told me was like the optimization of our time. It's not that people aren't watching linear sports, it's that we choose the greatest reward on our attention at any moment in the day. Therefore, the idea of an audience that is in any way confined is just nonsense. But it's not about Facebook, it's just nonsense. If we have infinite choice, we have total control, advertising, marketing messages, the relevance and reward of them built around people is a primacy. Whether you're building on us, whether you're building on TV, whether you're putting, it doesn't matter, because the competitive nature of the landscape we're building for is never been more intense.
Well, that tees me up for the next question to you. So in India, like in most parts of the world, we are witnessing a huge resurgence, a huge sort of explosion of OTT platforms.
Yeah.
And traditionally in India, which has been, we have about 190 million households, largely a single TV, and hence the kind of programming was essentially catered to who had the power of the remote.
Oh, right.
And, prime time was that. Whereas in an OTT world, you're moving prime time is my time.
Yeah.
And we've got some amazing stories which are getting sort of tabled out there. There are about 20-odd platforms. And it's all boiling down to, ultimately, it's only those 24 hours that you've got.
Yeah.
So how is Facebook preparing for this emerging landscape, whether in this market or indeed all over the world?
Yeah, well, video, is everywhere through our platform. So video, you know, when I grew up, when most of us grew up, video was a defined sort of medium, like it was a painter or it was like a thing, and we made video. And I think video has permeated almost every corner of our digital experiences in different ways for different reasons. I think the one you're referring to is more of a linear kind of lean back sort of experiential thing, and we've launched Watch recently in the last couple of years. I think it's about 400 million people. It's on Lite here in India as well, and I think it's, you know, it's early days, but what's exciting about it is our point of view with it is really the sociability of video. One of the things, I think it's about 12 million watch parties where the video is the conduit to connecting people. And that's really been a real focus of our product teams, is looking for social connection through media. And with Watch, that's what we're seeing with a lot of people coming together through shared passions, or they want to talk about a particular show. And that connection is, I think, one of the differentiators. But video overall, if you look at stories and the growth of stories, it's the fastest growing story medium, I think, in history. Like it's nothing, we've never seen anything like it. So if you're using video in stories, it's going to be sharp bursts generally, but it's still video and it's incredibly compelling.
And the sweet spot for stories would be what, like 30 seconds, 60 seconds? What is the sweet spot from your experience?
You know, it's a lot shorter than that. You know, you're looking, I mean, we generally feel mobile best practice is around 3 seconds to make sure you're capturing attention. You know, you can do different things, but people are moving. If you look at behavior of how we use stories, you know, that we're looking at them incredibly quickly as we move through our feed, as we look at stories. And again, that is not any platforms. That is people. People tell us how they use this technology. It is our job as creatives and marketers to meet them.
I know this is a bit of a geekier kind of question, but you talked video, and I agree with you. Video is becoming ubiquitous. It's always on. Your views on the player itself, and the fact that the player is the next real estate. The reason we are finding e-commerce companies now producing films, you know, because it becomes an easier way to keep engaged audiences, etc. Are there any key trends you're seeing as far as the player and the immersive nature on that? And on that same topic, on content, are you seeing certain kinds of trends even with virtual reality that brands are perhaps experiencing?
Well, I won't dive into virtual reality. I'll go back to your original point, which I think is very interesting, which is the journey from attention to action and the way those are integrated into forms, particularly in a tactile form like mobile. And if you look at stories, the ability to take some intent of like, oh, that's interesting, and then I want to buy it, the seamlessness of those experiences.
You can lead to commerce, literally.
It's already fluid. We have a wonderful piece of work that's actually the Facebook India team pioneered that we're taking around the world around a zero friction future. And if you get the opportunity, I highly recommend you spend time with them. And it's extraordinary in looking at how we as marketers, as business, are just burdened with an expectation that the process of moving from you know, knowledge, discovery, desire, conversion, every point of it needs to be seamless. And platforms like ours and many others are, you know, are going to continue to work to take that experience. So as you say, if you start with something that's engaging, that's earning attention, that's rewarding, and then there's something I see in it, my ability to convert that into something that I want, we're just going to do that. We're going to do that seamlessly. And we're going to expect to be able to do that seamlessly.
Any examples come to your mind when you sort of narrate that, just for the audience to kind of visualize? Any brands, any examples that come to your mind?
Well, I think in the fashion, I mean, I won't talk about specific companies, but I think particularly in the fashion world, you see the ability to use content where there's an item and then create a swipe at moment, particularly in stories. If you look at a lot of the story work that drives specifically to an action. But across many verticals it's happening, but I think the fashion space is one where it's working very well.
That's right. And I mean, they're also at retail level beginning to use things like AR, etc. to enable.
Well, the use of AR we're really excited with. We've done a lot of work actually in the creative shop using AR to create really wonderful experiences, whether it's people being able to try on sunglasses with Michael Kors. We've done work around the world. And in addition to it being fun, I think one of the things with AR that's great is actually utility. So if you're using AR, if you're looking at AR, one of the things is a lot of it is very fun, and then a lot of it is incredibly useful, whether it's in the makeup category, in the beauty category, trying on products. It's got so good now that it's actually quite an effective utility, as well as actually the novelty of doing something, you know, fun and enjoyable.
Facebook completes what, 15 years now?
We just had our birthday, yes.
Yes. What would be, you know, your message, so we were to come back 1 year, 2 years, I don't want us to be crystal ball gazing, let's say 5 years out of sorts, but if there were 3 key messages that you wanted to leave behind for this audience as an action to do across the broader spectrum of digital advertising, you know, what would your message be?
Well, I think I'll reflect your conference theme, which I commend you for choosing, around duty. And I think, you know, there was some, again, Paul Pullman spoke about it very well this morning. I think all of us who are in a position to really focus on the people we serve around the world have a duty to do that. And we look at that as putting people first, and it's been from our founding. I think in 15 years, you'll see that just as committed to, but probably better expressed around how we're doing that. And that would be the first and foremost thing I would doing. And I'm sure many of you running your companies and your agencies and your businesses are feeling the same way, that that is of primary importance, our duty to the people we serve. I think the 2 other things more related to the advertising marketing industry that I think will be about is, I think, again, we'll be deeply committed to making sure whatever tools, whatever technologies we build, we want to make them as accessible and easy to use and valuable to more people in more places. We want to make sure, as our deepest commitment to everyone in this room and world, that and you can pick your currency, every rupee, every dollar you invest with us is driving business growth. And whether what that is, we want to make sure that if you're investing money in our platforms, it's driving business growth, it's growing your business, whether you're a small business or whether you're the biggest businesses in the world. And that commitment will be resolved. And I think the last thing I'd say is innovation. You know, one of the things we're deeply committed to as a company is innovating. And one, you know, as I've said a couple of times, people drive so much of the change in our world, and we don't give them enough credit, that they tell us, this is how I want to create, this is how I want to consume, this is how I want to shop, this is how I want to discover. And the job of us in business, in so many places now, is to keep up. So generally, people are moving first, small businesses are moving faster, bigger businesses move a little after that. And our job, I think, if we have a 15 commitment, is to change the cadence of our innovation to keep up with the drive that people are making. They're showing us the way.
Duty, more
Equality.
transparency, more power to people, and innovation. And I like to certainly add there, considering this overwhelming component of content marketing and always on, or whatever we term it, I think experimentation as well is just as important for people to try, and the cost of experimentation has obviously come down as well in what...
Well, I think that's curiosity.
Yeah.
You know, one of the biggest things you can have as a secret weapon in marketing is relentless curiosity, because there is so much change around us all the time. It's very easy to become overwhelmed and fall back to what we know. But the opportunity is in having curiosity to become a learning organization that is constantly learning and constantly iterating and constantly improving, so that you look at new forms, you look at new ways, and you're relentlessly saying, my brand, my company will be at the forefront of that, because that knowledge will do 2 things. One, it will defend us from the next round of disruptors who are going to use those for their advantage, and it will keep us connected to where culture is. So it's pretty essential.
Thank you, and it is my duty to also remind you that whilst you're in this wonderful city of Kochi, in this God's own country and state of Kerala, please don't get overwhelmed with the numerous mounds of chili, and do try the wonderful food which has been laid out for you, and experience the city. And thank you so much, Mark. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
Certainly
Pleasure.
look forward to seeing you and having you more here in India.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Well, some tough questions, but really well handled there, Mr. Darcy. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to invite on stage. Gentlemen, may I please request you to remain on stage? Mr. Roy? Mr. Darcy? Hi. May I please invite on stage Mr. Dagmar Schultz, the Global Managing Director, IAA Global, to kindly present its Miss Hi, I'm sorry. Which is why you should not read from the teleprompter. Nice to meet you. Thank you. May I please request you to present a memento to Mr. Roy and to Mr. Darcy, please. Thank you very much.